All right, good afternoon. This is Andy McNeill, and I'm super excited today to talk to Dr. Hunter Biram. Hunter is a professor in the Department of Agriculture at the University of Arkansas. And I think it's Little Rock, but online, so it's probably Fayetteville students as well, but also the associate director of the Southern Risk Management Education Center, which is, I think, Hunter, and I'm going to have you explain it, but I think it's the part of the broader extension services of the USDA. But maybe you can explain that to me. And how are you doing? Glad to have you.
And I'm doing just dandy, and I'm excited to be here, and I greatly appreciate the invitation.
Well, and we're going to basically be talking today about agriculture in the state of Arkansas. So what's the impact to the state of Arkansas, and what's going on with farmers themselves? A lot of them are in precarious positions just because of well, we're going to talk about why, and maybe where things need to be headed. Let's just see if we can tee this up, the right way. So, Hunter, you may know some of these numbers a little bit better than me, but the way I sort of think about the GDP of Arkansas, give or take, is call it it's a moving target each year. It's dynamic, but let's say it's $160 billion, something like that. And when we look at the impact of agriculture in the state of Arkansas, it's really probably somewhere between, 8 and 20+% of the state's GDP, depending on what you count in Arkansas. Does that resonate with you? Is that similar to what you would say?
Yeah, no, I mean, I literally was giving a presentation Tuesday to the Arkansas General Assembly, to the Ag Subcommittee. And that's one thing that I pointed out, is that actually within the within the general GDP, ag makes up about 8.5%. So if you're looking at, you said 160. I've seen 151, 152.
Yeah, 151. And a lot of times I say 150 just to make it simple for people. But,
Sure.
and then I go on to point out that the states around us are significantly bigger than we are, just so people can get a context of this, But in terms of agriculture, Arkansas is in terms of where to rank the states, I think the 14th largest ag state in the United States. Is that what you would say, or do I have that wrong?
We're actually the 8th.
We're the 8th. Okay.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? We're the 8th. And so when you look at a map of just these portions that we're talking about, you see Arkansas and then like Mississippi.
Yeah.
And then you see like all these states in the upper Midwest.
Right.
So really across the southern region, I'm talking like from Oklahoma, Texas, all the way up into Virginia. I mean, Kentucky, Tennessee, throw them in there too. We're actually number 1 in the southern region in terms of how big the portion is, how big a portion the ag GDP is of the state's GDP.
Which I would say is also strategically important to the United States, just because food supply is a thing, right? We all need to eat, And so when we define agriculture in the state of Arkansas, how would you define the breadth of it? I mean, I think we all think rice, but what else do you think?
Yeah, it's a lot, and in the best way, it's a lot. So you have rice, of course, soybeans, corn, cotton, peanuts, even a little bit of grain sorghum, or milo, as some might even call that. And that's on the crop side. But then you have livestock too. I mean, we have these cow operations,
Right.
Cow farms. I mean, I grew up on a cow farm actually, and also on a chicken farm. And so chickens and chicken houses, and so chickens obviously in Arkansas, we got
Right.
a lot of corporations where chicken's a big deal to them, and then you have forestry too, all across southern Arkansas. So, and then catfish. Don't forget about catfish. Out in Lone Oak and out at the Keogh Fish Farm. So we have a lot of different agricultural sectors that makes ag a big deal to the state of Arkansas.
That's right. And if we were to happen to throw in timber, it would just be even bigger, right? Yeah, because so when I look at the different numbers, it's a wide range depending if we're talking about crop production, poultry, and so Floral, Arkansas, where you're from, basically, do you think of it as outside Batesville, or is it just too far away from Batesville to say that?
That's, Batesville's normally my reference point when people ask where that is. I say we're about 30 minutes south of Batesville, but we're also pretty close to Heber Springs, Pangburn, Newport, that area.
Interesting. Well, I've been part of a company where we've been land applying sludges, really they're wastewater residuals. So dirty water goes down the pipe into the black blocks that cleans it. Clean water goes into the watershed. And then the solids that we create are very rich in nutrients, and under state permits, we land apply those for beneficial use as fertilizer. And we've done it all around Batesville. There's quite a bit of poultry operation up in that neck of the woods. And so I have this reference point for farmers in the sense that for the last 20 plus years, we've been working with farmers in all sorts of ways, from that all the way to things like, you know, well, we produce biodiesel, and so we're involved in that as well. Um, and then my last couple reference points before I want to dive into this, but I just want to tell you because you don't know, like, so like one of my best friends here in Russellville, he is a berry farmer, and so we didn't mention it because I know blueberries aren't a big, huge production crop for us, but I watch how hard it is for what he does, and it is not a get rich thing. It is a passion and a love for what the outdoors and working the land, and then my wife's family are all farmers down in Stuttgart, really in DeWitt too.
Yeah.
Um, and
They will.
this year's been a tough year. And they're not, for example, we've had a family member, they've had to mortgage more property in order to cover operations this year. And I would describe them as, pretty scared, or pretty, maybe not scared is the right word, but, concerned, worried, you know, what are you seeing out there with different Arkansas farmers?
I think scared is an appropriate word. I know that it can be a scary word, right? But I think that is the sentiment, and it's something that a lot of folks would say, well, don't farmers complain all the time? Well, I'll say this year they've got a really good reason to be worried because we're seeing low prices with as and input prices remain elevated. I mean, if you were look at a spread between the crop prices and the price of the farmer would receive for the crop versus the price of like fertilizer, the price of pesticides, the price of the irrigation or water. We are seeing the biggest gap between those two prices, and not in a good way.
Right.
Um, in like the last 25 years. And so that gap is almost 50%. So you're looking at a 50% gap between what the farmer put into their crop versus what they're getting out of their crop.
Yeah, it's been pretty dramatic. Let's break that down for a second, but I want to just uh I want to sort of talk about subsidies as well, but let's start with just pricing, just commodity pricing in the marketplace, just to sort of as a baseline. And I'll use corn, but then I'd love to hear your views on how you think about rice, soybeans. So when I think about corn in the United States, and I think I'm right when I say this, I think if you were to go back over time, let's just say like back into the 1800s, corn prices generally were in they went through like a couple different periods coming up to right about 2005, and where you might say they traded in a band like prior to 2005 it traded in a band, let's say between 225 and 275 a bushel. Would you say that's kind of true for corn? And then when we did the Renewable Fuel Standards Act with corn, um, the corn production increased, and then the pricing the pricing has been very volatile since. Maybe not but it's volatile. And today in corn, at least, half our production goes into ethanol, at least for the domestically used corn. But tell me I don't even know what corn is today, but maybe you probably do. But so I know soybeans are at a low, rice is at a low, um, cotton's at a low. Um, um, Tell us what goes on with those prices over the last like decade.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of hit on what you're saying with the prices are low and what you're trying to say there. I mean, if you look at each crop, okay, so let's say that you are a crop farmer. So you could be a corn farmer, soybean farmer, cotton, rice, winter wheat,
Right.
beans. You can throw all that in there. And so these are the kind of farmers that I'm going to be talking about. Okay, what are they trying to do? Obviously, they want to grow a crop, but they don't just want to volunteer their time. They do want
Right.
to earn a
Right.
profit, to be able to pay for their time and their labor, because I mean, they still have to live too. But the issue is what we're seeing is that across all these major crops, except for peanuts, and we can go into that if you want, but I don't think that's too relevant for this conversation. But across all the crops, there are significant losses or negative net returns that are being projected for 2025. So what do I mean by significant? Well, about $250 an acre loss on corn, about $350 an acre loss on cotton, nearly $100 an acre loss on soybeans. Rice, again, about 250, maybe $275
Yeah.
per acre loss. To put that into perspective, that loss makes up about, let's just say, a little less than a third of what that rice budget would be. And that's the loss. So you
That's
got
the
to
law.
think about how much does the price need to come up, or how much production do you need to offset that loss? Well, you're going to need at least a third more in your bushels, a third
Right.
more in your production for rice and for corn. I've seen in some counties. In soybeans, I've seen you need almost double your production to be able to break even. We're talking about breaking even. This isn't even making money. So it's very difficult for a farmer this year to be able to yield their way out or produce their way out of this.
The
Pro-
and just to kind of lean on what you're saying, if you said, "Hey, look, and I'm going to make this up for simple math. Your acre right there produces 100 bushels, and you're saying, hey, it's going to have to then produce 200 bushels to maybe make it up, and
yeah,
and and that's just not practical, right? Like that's not going to happen.
yeah.
We don't have that sort of advancement in fertilizer. We don't have that advancement in the crop genetics. That's and so that's sort of off or you have to do it in price at some point because the input costs are not going to go back down. I mean, they could, but they're the sort of pricing, and we'll get into this, but like which one they go up. So all of these people are going to be in a lot of problems, you know.
Right. And, in 2025 is an especially difficult year because I'm not sure if you remember this, but it rained a bunch this spring,
It
and it
did.
rained a lot. And I don't know if you drive much on 67. I'm sure that you do. But like in Jacksonville, I remember going home to the farm, and I had to stop and go through water that was on Highway 67 because there was so
Yes.
much rain. And so if you imagine that, and if your listeners imagine that much rain on 67 on a major highway, imagine what it's like on the farm when everything, all this flat land, that water's not going anywhere. In fact, we had so much rain. It was actually about 3 months worth of rain in 3 days. I looked at it. I looked at NOAA, and that's pretty much the equivalent. I was like, man, I think it was like 12, maybe 13 inches of rain in 3 days. And I was like, well, I wonder about how much do we normally get this time of year? Well, it ain't that much in
It's
three
not that
days.
much.
It's about that much in 3 months, though.
That's right. Because I think Arkansas, it's probably what 50 inches a year, 45 inches a year, something like that.
That
So
I don't know. Don't give me the line.
yeah, I'm just well, when so okay, so in addition to cost inputs that are gone completely going up, and I'm going to explain those here in a second, but the tell us how the rain impacted the crops for someone who doesn't really understand it.
Yeah, so rain is a good thing. Luke Bryan would say, right?
Yep.
Rain is a good thing, and it really is, and we are grateful for rain. But there is also too much of a good thing,
Right.
uh, and that's what Alan Jackson would say. So I mean, it's there was just too much. Okay, so what does that mean? What happens is it gets wet, and imagine trying to just imagine trying to drive your car or your
Yeah.
truck out there. You can't do it. So if you can't get out there and do that, think about a farmer trying to drive their tractor, trying to
Right.
drive a tiller, trying to till up the ground and get those beds ready to plant in. They couldn't do it. So what happened? We had to wait for the water to dry up, and it pushed back an optimal planting window, or the best planting window possible, to get the best possible production. So it just continued to push that back. And because of that, yield potential or production potential fell. So remember I said you can't yield your way out of it?
Yep.
Well, you're just trying to get at the average right now. That's the best case scenario, is average. So if they need to get 33% above average or get double the average, but they were delayed in planting,
Yeah.
I
No
mean,
way.
you got both hands tied behind your back.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no. Well, okay. Let's pivot for a second. So, in terms of how the government works with farmers, let's just explain this. So, and maybe I don't know what the best like onboarding to that is. Is it back in like the Depression when they originally put some of the bills into place? And what did they do?
Yep, goes all the way back to the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. That was under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So there's
Okay.
only history. This is
Closing in on 100 years ago. That's
yeah.
kind of scary to think, but that's how, uh, so what do they do?
So what did they do? We were facing a farm crisis. I'm not going to say that there's a comparison here to be made, but I'll just say they were also facing a farm crisis. And so to keep our farmers in business. And oh, by the way, there was a much larger share of farmers during that time. I don't know the percentage off the top of my head,
Much
but
larger.
let's
Yeah.
say it's a lot more than less than 2%, which is what we're facing right now. So you got the general population pretty much is overlapping with the farm population because almost everybody farmed. There's a larger percentage of people that farmed. And so the big idea was to say, okay, well, the general economy was doing decent at the time, and we do see some counter cyclical nature of when the ag economy is doing bad, the general economy is doing good, and so on. And there are recessions that happen, and then for depression, that's when both industries are doing really bad. But at the time, whenever this program was designed, the farmer said, "Hey, I want my farm dollar to go as far as my consumer dollar goes."
Right.
And so there was this thing called parity, and there was this program that pretty much said, well, we're going to pretty much bring your dollar up to where you can buy your groceries, to where you can continue to farm, and that you can continue to live. And so that was the policy response, was to make sure that everybody still had their food, had ample food supply, and so that farmers could still afford to go to the grocery store and buy a loaf of bread.
And is the effect of that essentially saying, hey, for this crop, here is a floor on it. And if you go out and I'm gonna make this up, if our floor is $3.50 on a bushel of corn and it's $3 today, the government makes up that 50 cents, essentially.
That's right. And we would call that a farm safety net. So I think
Okay.
the best way to describe the safety net, I have a teacher that I learned a lot from at Arkansas State whenever I was doing my undergraduate there. And what he would say, he uses like a trapeze artist illustration. So imagine you're a trapeze artist and you're swinging from one swing to the other and you're flying around in midair. But what if your hand slips and then you fall on the ground?
Right.
There's a net to catch that person so they don't hurt themselves,
Right.
and then so that they don't break their bones. Well, imagine that trapeze artist is now a farm income, okay, and that
Right.
farm income is is all over the place. It changes month to month, day to day, even in some instances. And then what happens when that income falls to the ground? Well, that safety net is going to be there to keep the farm income at a place where a farmer can continue to farm and, frankly, to continue to live.
Yeah. And so fast forward to today. If I'm a farmer today, and and what are the programs that are available to me, these same safety nets, whatever we call them, if we call them a subsidy, and I realize there's and maybe explain the differences between these and even something like crop insurance,
Yeah.
which I also think is subsidized, but maybe you can explain that as well.
Yeah, so before I get into that, I'm just going to motivate why the government is even involved still today.
Oh,
We're
that's
talking,
a great place. Okay, like why even do it?
yeah, because back in the day, like I said, a very large percentage of the population was in farming. Now it's less than 2%. So there's a big gap between those two. So imagine this: imagine your paycheck changes day to day.
Yep.
Like a lot of folks are salaried now, and man, that's amazing. God bless you. You
Right.
are, you are in great shape to have a salary that's fixed. And I mean, unless something just terrible happens, a massive liquidation or bankruptcy, whatever it is, you're going to have your money. And there is stability with that, right? A farmer does not have a salary. There
Nope.
is no salary for a farmer. They are on wages that change day to day, which that wage in a way is like a crop price. And oh, and by the way, they have no control over that. There's no promotion to be had with that. They can
Right.
they can continue to work as hard as they can. They go to the extension meetings. They're reading up on all the latest seed technology, fertilizer applications. I mean, they're just doing their best, and they're going to be CEOs, and they're promoted to CEO, and then they just lose everything. That
Right.
just makes no sense. And oh, by the way, this is food we're talking about. We're not talking about widgets.
Right. Right.
This
Yeah.
is food that we're talking about. So again, this farmer, they're doing their best to try and get that paycheck that changes all the time. We call that risk whenever we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, there's a risk and possibilities of like all these different outcomes, but we don't know with certainty, with 100% certainty, what's going to happen. So that's why these programs still exists because we still want to have that affordable food supply, that abundant food supply that we keep talking about, and how productive farmers have been. We still want to have that so that you and I can, and everyone else can have food that is affordable. So
Right. Well, I think, well, I think it's just strategic to any country, right? If you have instability in your food supply, you're going to have instability, you
indeed,
know, and,
we've
and, and, and we can go through, the history of the world, and a lot of the crises are related to food crises,
yeah.
no doubt about it. So, so I agree with you that there's a strategy, there's something strategic about food in general. So, but today, like you said, way less farmers, and maybe even a trend to have way less, family farms and more larger, let's say, industrial operations. Like, it's so, which we'll go to that here in a second. But what does the government do today? What's available for your average farmer?
Yeah, so again, I I go back to stabilizing income. You and I have our salary. We're going to have that stabilized income, and so that's ultimately what the government's trying to do is to stabilize farm income, so that we can continue to have many family farms, so that we can continue to have the abundant food supply. And so, stabilizing farm income. What are the aspects of farm income? I think is what you're
Right.
trying to get at. Well, we have price times production. Price times quantity, Econ 101,
Right.
that's called revenue. So it's all about revenue stabilization. And it's all about revenue stabilization despite what it costs to produce the crop. So the safety net will account for that cost of production. And that's what motivates these changes to farm policy over time, is because we've seen changes to inputs, we've seen changes to production. We're pretty much farming so much, we're far more productive on the same acres of land now than we were 100 years ago. We're far more productive in that space. Prices have changed. Inflation, right? I mean, that's just something that everybody understands. The general increase in prices of everything just over time. A dollar didn't go as far today
Right.
as it did 100 years ago. So, because of all these changes throughout time, we've had to change the policy as well. But the main message still stands to stabilize revenue, stabilize farm income to help our farmers keep farming.
And is if I participate in one of these, do I register my farm with the government, and is it still, I might get paid, um, this safety net, or something, even like if I didn't plant, like I held something out, are there multiple programs? How does that actually work?
Multiple is a really good word to use. It
Yeah.
That's why I have a job, is just because
Yes.
there's just so many programs that are out there. So the general safety net that does not require any premium or any kind of fee, that's what I was just describing, was,
Right.
you described that price differential. When it falls below a floor, the government will pay the difference between those two prices, excuse me, and pay that on a specified level of production for a farmer based on how much they typically produce. Now, crop insurance, that's another area. That's another area that the government will provide assistance for. And here's the interesting thing, and it's a common misconception. Crop insurance is not a free program, it's insurance.
Right.
I mean, you have your property and casualty, you got it for your vehicle, you've got it for health, you've got life insurance. And so you have to pay a premium for those. Well, farmers still have to pay a premium for their crop insurance. Now, what's different though with the government being involved is, in one way, the farmer is going to pay a cheaper premium than the, let's just say, the true premium or the actually fair premium. And so they're going to pay a little bit less than that, a little bit less. I mean, it's pretty darn expensive because of the federal government's involvement providing assistance. But the government also provides reinsurance for these private insurance companies who are going to be writing these policies for these farmers. Because here's the thing. Think about this. Why do we even subsidize crop insurance? I think that's one of the best illustrations. What is the probability of every person in East Arkansas having a car accident at the same time?
Yeah. Pretty much zero.
Pretty much zero.
Yeah.
Okay, so independent risk, independent risk. They're not correlated, they're not related. Okay, what about with crops? What's the probability of all crops in Arkansas, or let's just say half the crops in Arkansas, going to zero in a year?
Well, it's got to be a higher percentage yeah,
Uh,
much higher, you know.
just so we know that's greater than zero, and because those risks are correlated, similar production systems, similar lay of the land, similar climate. And so some work that I've done has been looking at hurricanes, and so hurricanes don't just impact one county, they don't just impact one farm, they impact hundreds of thousands of farms
Right.
in many ways. There is the actual core hurricane system. There's also the rain that comes off of it, the wind that comes off of it, and the hail in some instances that comes off of that. And that's going to be in multiple states, not just, again, one farm or one county or one region. We're talking multiple states.
Right.
Now, there's this large correlation in losses. So private insurers, they're scared. They're like, I don't know if I want to insure that or not. Well, the government says, don't worry. We're going to be here because our farmers still need this protection, going all the way back to what we were motivating policy
But,
for earlier.
but the interesting thing is relative. Let's talk about the cost, and then I want to like because I do think these subsidies as a percentage of the total revenue are relatively small. You're
Yeah.
right. There's a perception that they're not, but they are. And so here's how I sort of look at it. One is if you and I wanted to go out and buy an acre of property in Stuttgart, Arkansas to be rice
Mm.
farmers, and we go back 20 years, that let ground is going to be, let's say it was $1,000 an acre, right? Today it's probably five.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so while if you bought so many other things and you said it was $1 then, is it $5 today? No, it hasn't gone up in the same way. But the cost of land has risen substantially. Fuel can go up and down and is a big input,
Yeah.
but everything that's metal oriented, so like a farm tractor,
Mm.
a baler, even like in a rice farmer, all of the pumps and the piping to move water, all of these things are substantially up. Let me just give you one example. So I own or part of businesses that own lots of trucks and farm tractors. And, a truck for '05 to like, I don't know, 2020, depending on what you had on it, how big it was and what it did, let's say 95,000 to 125,000. Today, that's a couple $100,000. Farm tractors are even more expensive. So when I look at these, and then you throw in fertilizer, which has risen, seed prices, which has risen. So what I worry about in terms of farming is that I have some of these costs that are not commodities. So they're not going to go down on a year over year basis. They will probably only rise. And these are all pre-tariff activities, right? So we're
Mhm.
not talking about like we did a tariff last month and this is the impact. This is stuff people have owned maybe for years, right? But the cost of all that, the maintenance, all that's gone up. And you gave great math, which is very simple. If I take whatever I produce times the price, that's my revenue, right? And so which, like you pointed out, is volatile and goes up and down. What I worry about for the farmers is I sit there and I go, wow, these pricing is not going to go. Their cost structure is not going to continue. There's no, if we don't have higher pricing on the crops, they won't get the recovery they need. And I worry you'll have not only a bad year this year, but next year too. Do you worry for the same thing?
I do. We work with a center at the University of Arkansas. We work with a center up at the University of Missouri called the Rural and Farm Finance Policy Analysis Center, and they provide state level projections on things like revenue, expenses, things of that nature. And when we start looking at those projections, still looking at negative returns, and I can verify that with our University of Arkansas Extension crop enterprise budgets. Looking at our projection for 26, again, we're looking at in 2026 the third straight year of negative net farm income for the row crops sector.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And one of the things I think is interesting, so like Arkansas Business puts out a list of everybody that receives farm subsidies and
Mhm.
they just call it subsidy receipts. So it's probably a blend of many different things, I suspect. I don't really know how the math works. If you look at this and you don't really understand, it looks like people are it's a get rich scheme, right? Because the first person on the list got $1.8 million. And so but if you add up these 100, that are on the list, and the lowest one on the 100 got $148,000, and you just run some simple math, you know, that's $25 million, give or take, for these 100 people on a market that's, 8, 9 billion. So you're talking about very small percentages of overall farm revenue or cost offset or insurance, rebates or whatever you want to call it, money you got from somebody else is fractional, and so am I wrong about that?
No, you're right on it. I mean, what I found, if you look at just the USDA Economic Research Service farm income statistics, what I found at least is that generally speaking, the subsidies or the government assistance, however you want to put it, accounts for about 5% of all cash income for agriculture. So it is a very small portion. And here's another stat for you that honestly, I I learned this, I've heard this, but the way that it was put this time, I was like, that really says a lot. And so when you think about the full federal government, how much money are we talking? 6.75 trillion, almost $7 trillion. Okay. When you look at how much the farm safety net is, it's literally one quarter of 1% of that, 0.25%
It's a
of
teeny amount. Yeah.
it is a very small amount, I mean, especially compared to many other. I mean, just compared even to the food stamps program. Food stamps is going to be about 1.5%, still very small. But in light of that full farm bill and what's in the farm bill, I mean, you're looking at something that's 0.25%, a very small portion.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point because in the U.S. federal government annual budget, it's a small percentage. I mean, especially even if you compare to other things like, you probably know this, but three-fourths of the federal budget is really, you're not even voting on it, right? Because it's Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and interest on the debt, and it accounts for roughly 75%, give or take. Now that doesn't get into the fact that we're borrowing money to cover a lot of this stuff. That's a whole nother issue. But when I think about the other things I think that will impact farming as we go forward is I and I don't know if you have a perspective or a crystal ball. I know we would just be guessing here, but I would view the tariffs that we've put on that potentially have the impact of other people shifting their buying to other countries. And as I understand it in Arkansas, about 50% of our crop production is exported. Now, as a country, and I don't know, is that right? Is that what you would think is about 50% of what we do? Or
what
is
is
that
that?
too high?
No, I'm trying to think of what the stat is. That sounds right to me. I can obviously verify for you later, but that's one of those stats that's escaping me at the moment. I
Well,
apologize.
I think the U.S. I think that if you look at, and this is just broad numbers, but I think if you look at U.S. crop production, generally speaking, and we're talking about row crop production, so corn, soybeans, wheat,
Mhm.
things like that. I think that we export about 25% and domestically use 75%. And the things that are generally exported are wheat, which really isn't going to be an Arkansas thing, right? We're not going to do as much. We might do winter wheat, but it's not like we're, you know, other Western mountain states that are got, like Oklahoma,
Right.
soybeans, cottons. And I don't think we got a lot of tree nuts here, but we probably have some, but probably
No,
not as a percentage.
no, not that much. Soybeans are going to be our number one crop in terms of acreage and value of production.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't have the rice numbers, but I'm assuming we export quite a bit of the rice as well.
Yeah,
And
most
so,
of what we produce is
uh,
exported.
and so, you know, I think that I look at that and I say that the tariffs could have an impact, and then the fact that we're exporting things as a greater percentage could also have another impact on Arkansas farmers. If and I don't know all of the supply chain well enough, but if you're selling to China or Russia or one of these big countries and they turn to go to somebody like Brazil, I wonder if it's another thing that we've got to worry about. It is putting the politics of it all aside, you know, is that something that also, is something you have to really watch out and think through for next year?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, China has not bought one bushel of soybeans for the 25-26 marketing year. So for the new crop coming online, China has not bought one bushel. And at this point, they've usually bought quite a bit because normally they buy from about where we are now, early September through December, and they'll continue to buy throughout the year. But really, they're just buying to try and get to Brazil's crop, which comes online in January. Well, China has so many soybeans on hand right now that they're able to wait us out. they're able to
Yeah.
call us on a bluff and wait us out until January comes along, and then they're like, all right, then we'll start buying from Brazil, which their beans are cheaper anyway because of the retaliatory tariffs on soybeans for U.S. soybeans. It has about $2 a bushel. So you're looking at like maybe a $12 per bushel price versus like maybe a $10 per bushel price. So you're already marking it up 20% because of that retaliatory tariff on our beans.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think I look at these tariffs, I just look at them as a tax. So you know, and I'm not. I guess that's just how I view them. Like, call that political, call that not. I view that, and I think that when you layer on these taxes into a market, I think you're going to create disruption until the market, how the equilibrium comes back somehow. And so, which I think it will. Because I'd like to think in the grand scheme of things, there's food scarcity on the planet, and there's we have we I don't know the numbers, but I think it's a billion, a large percentage of, maybe not large, but a big percentage of people have food scarcity in the world. And so you would think that over time that crop production globally will rise, and that all the food we produce will be consumed somehow, some way.
Yeah, and that's under the assumption that the population will continue to increase, and I've seen studies
Agree.
that show that actually the population is projected to decline,
Oh,
which is
that's another issue. Yeah, because you got to think there. If it declines, what do we do? Well, let me switch gears a little bit. What do you see for the type of folks that you're working with in changes in terms of what does it mean to be a farmer? Because I know that, like, I teed up that we work with farmers. I know that that from what I see, there's, especially in certain states, like let's use California, you'll have larger and larger farms that are quite frankly pretty sophisticated. A lot of them they'll have a PhD on staff, and they'll it's just a huge operation.
yeah. It is. No, there's no such thing as just, planting it and then going to the lake and coming back and harvesting it. I mean, that is
Yeah,
not the case. You got to be there all the time. All the time
right,
you got to be there. You got to be checking your irrigation, making sure that you're putting out the right amount of water at the right time. You gotta have good books. You gotta have good accounting. You need to have an accountant on staff. You need to know the good legal terms. You need to know how to read rental agreements, and because there's a lot of land that's rented now. I
right.
think 2/3 of our ground is rented now, not so much owned. And so that's a big line item for a farmer's expense and for a big line item for their budget. And so, they got to be able to build relationships with the grain elevators and other places that they can sell their crop. I mean, they got to be involved in the community and play a present. I mean, they have to be CEOs. They have to
That's
do
right.
literally every part of business. They're the ones that are going to have to be doing it. And I mean, that they can build a staff and try their best. But, one struggle that I've been hearing is, I mean, there are a lot of folks whose kids are not returned to the farm. And listen, this is one finger pointing and three pointing back at me. I grew up on a farm,
Right.
and I'm not there right now. Now, am I
That's right.
involved? Do I still talk to the family, and do I hear day to day? Of course, but I'm not there actively helping to manage the farm and make those decisions. I have left the farm because I have seen the risk of it. So there is a big need to try and keep folks like me on the farm and make that attractive. But right now, that just doesn't seem to be the case. The average age of the farmer continues to increase, and the number of new farmers coming on very minimal.
Very hard. Well, I mean, I think risk is the key word. I mean, if we were to if we were to use another industry, for example, I mean, like, think about somebody like Walmart. Walmart is out there selling something, a widget for a price for revenue, but they have complete control of their supply chain. If I'm a farmer, all the risk is jammed on me. So, and I'm not picking on these companies per se, but Monsanto, that they don't have any production risk in the crop. I buy the rice, rice seed from them or whoever I buy it from. It's not like they say, hey, if you don't get 100 bushels per acre, we'll cut, that's not on us. Sorry. It's not like, Caterpillar or John Deere they have risk, but they don't have the commodity risk, right? Uh, and the fuel guy gets paid, right? They're not going to, you don't get any, it's not like you can say to the fuel guy, like, hey, I'll pay you in 60 days, right? The big fuel companies are not going to let you do that. You're going to have to pay every 7 days, And so these guys then foot all the risk. And I think that one of the things, at least that my family has to do that's involved with it, is they end up having, annual loans on their crops, because the other thing that we didn't talk about is all the money goes out first. You play the bet first, and you don't know what you're going to make until the end. You know, because like you pointed out, my gosh, there's so many variables that could hurt your crop. You know, uh, So do you see here in Arkansas, like with that trend of more renting of the land, less owning of the land? Do you see a trend toward larger, farming operations versus, hey, a 22-year-old that wants to get into the business doing it? Because I look at that, that's got to be super hard.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, we do see general increase in the size of the farm. I think it's increased. It's basically doubled since the 1800s. The average farm size, I think, it's gone from about maybe 200 acres to almost 400, about 366 acres is about the average farm size. So farms are getting bigger to help achieve those what we would call economies of scale, to be able to spread out the overhead over more acres. That fixed cost that you can spread out over more acres, so that your per acre cost ends up coming down. And so then we see also a lot of renters. The renters are the ones that are the most at risk right now. The ones that are
Right.
exclusively renting, they're the
Right.
ones that are most at risk. And you bring up loans. Okay, so the reason why you're seeing a lot, out in national media, not just Arkansas media and newspaper, but national, about the farm crisis is, okay, yes, there was a new safety net included in the one big beautiful bill. That's great. That's really going to help our farmers out. The issue, though, is the payments will not be received this year. They're going to be received a year from now. They'll be received until October 2026 next year, because of how the marketing year runs. The marketing year runs from pretty much September of this year through August of next year, or in
I
some
see.
cases, October of this year through September of next year. So because of the marketing year for a crop, you harvest it and then you market it throughout the year. Because of that, farmers won't receive the cash to help recoup the losses from this year until next year.
Do,
And
do,
so, yeah,
do you think in the so just to put a pin on that, so in the big beautiful bill, what it essentially did is it took the floor of these pricing, and it raised it a little bit.
correct.
And my question to you is, from what you see, cost input, etc., did it go far enough, or is it too far? Like, what would be your view?
I think it was a very significant improvement. It was a
Yeah,
very significant improvement. I think it's going to be very helpful. I think really the issue now is the timing of the payments, just for this one time. I don't think going forward, once we get into 26 through 31, which is what it's authorized through 2031, I think farmers are going to be fine. I mean, all of the things constant, of course. I think we have other issues to contend with, but in terms of this safety net doing what it needs to do in the authorized time frame, I think it did a really good job. I think it's a much stronger safety net than it was.
okay. So you think that it's enough. Like, you wouldn't be saying, if you were in front of Bozeman right now and you were whispering in his ear, you wouldn't be saying, "Hey, you know what? It needs to go up another dollar or another quarter." I
Nope.
mean,
I think it was a very job well done.
got it. Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad to know that. And so, and I would say, I think that some of the other sectors, I think, are okay. I haven't paid as much attention to cattle prices, but I know you. I think you grew up, like, you guys ran cattle too, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Um, I have lots of friends. I would call that I would call it a bit of an addiction. All the guys that run, the guy that actually cuts my hair is 92 years old, and he still runs cattle. You know, gets up every day. Now, he's done a lot, but, like, it's a game that he just loves playing. And so, um,
Yeah.
and I've had business partners that have been involved in it for years. And say, yeah, it's good years, bad years. I can't. I don't, how's this year going on cattle? I think it's going okay this year.
Oh, if you
It's
have the
it's a good
cattle,
year.
it's going great.
Yeah,
Record high.
I was going to say it's going great. Yeah,
Uh-huh. If you have the cattle, like high prices with no quantity equates to zero still.
that's right. That's right. You got to have the cattle. And so, well, if you were telling new legislators coming into the state of Arkansas, or even going to Congress, what would you be recommending to them to be thinking about or do or advocate for, as it relates to agriculture?
I think I'm just going to go back to how we started. I mean, we have a very abundant and affordable food supply, and that is what allows us to have. We spend across the whole world. The United States spends the smallest amount of disposable income on food.
That's
So
true. Yeah.
to be able to have affordable food, having this policy set in place to where we have many of these family farms continuing to farm and do a really good job and continue to be very productive, very efficient as they always have been, caring for the land. I think it's good to have sound policy that keeps our farmers in business.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, um, last thing. So tell me about the teaching. What do you teach? I know this is totally switching gears.
Yeah, so I teach a class called Risk in Agricultural Production, where it's a two-part class. Like it's all one semester, but in the first part we talk about measuring risk and what even is risk, and then the second part is all about managing risk. And so, how do we manage that risk with insurance, farm programs, things of that nature? So it's a really fun class. I really enjoy it.
Are you able to apply some of this stuff back to your family's farm at all? Or are you like just, or do they? I mean, sure, you're getting calls. You know, you've got to be, super knowledgeable on a lot of these different issues related back to the family farm.
I'll tell you, I think that's where I learned risk first was on the family farm. I mean, just knowing that our peach crop could, uh, a late cold snap could take out the whole crop and then you're out for the summer. I mean, whatever revenue you were going to have, you're out.
Well, yeah, because there's nothing. Well, one of the things I would definitely say, because I feel like as an entrepreneur, starting a number of businesses, um, there's nothing that makes you appreciate risk when you're putting your own dollar at risk. You
Right.
know, it gives you a heightened understanding of even abstract concepts.
Yeah.
And so,
Um,
in fact, Hunter, I was like, this is years ago, but that back in I think in 17 is when the first Trump administration made changes to the tax law, and I was introducing Bruce Westerman at some event, and I was going to tell a joke about LLCs. Okay, and so I thought I would just tell the table real quick because I wasn't sure if I could really pull the joke off. And so I tell the three or four guys next to me, and they all looked at me. They're like, "Yeah, I don't really get what you're saying. Like, I have no understanding." And where I'm going with this is that unless you've set up LLCs, or and which really was equating to the risk that I was taking, you just don't know, right? And so if you don't actually have to live through what a farmer has to do, you just don't know what these risks really are like. You know, I'm sure in this, like, even looking, I happen to have this up on my screen, the list of people that got the subsidies. Um, I assume you just in your position, get to know most of these farming operations about Arkansas, and in your mind, is there this like I thought I could always tell this when I showed up in a farmer. I'm just curious if this is true for you. Do you have a sort of a thing where you look at it and go like, I can tell if this is a really good farmer versus maybe let's just say an average farmer?
Yeah, I'll say just think about it. It's kind of like they self-select because when they come to an extension meeting, they're coming to learn because
Yeah.
they want to do better. So, frankly, most of the farmers that I get to meet are the best farmers, and I think we have some of the best farmers in the country. And I really enjoy visiting with them. I've done many farm visits, and taken text and phone calls, and built friendships, built relationships with these people. And so, no, I'm pretty proud to support our farmers and help them stay in business.
Yeah, some of them. I mean, I have to say too, my experience working with, and we work with just dozens and dozens of farmers. One of the things I really appreciate, the ones that I like to work with, they are super industrious, and so often they farm and something else, And so one of my first farming friends was a guy out in Mulberry named Jack Alexander. I don't know if you know who Jack is, but Jack was a farmer out there, but he also had a Kubota tractor dealership. He also had a little, excavating business that turned into a really nice oil and gas business. And he just was uh, just industrious. The guy just, and I assume that's what you see with a lot of farmers that you talk to.
Yeah, they've got to get creative. They figure it out. I mean, that's where I learned to figure things out was on the farm. Like if you're stranded out and you're trying to fix your tractor, fix your truck, like you're the nearest, automotive shop or from even your grandpa or somebody come help you, like you just got to figure it out. And that's what farmers really good at is figuring things out.
Excellent. Well, I'll leave it there. Hunter, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you getting on and talking to us about farming here in Arkansas. Um, I hope to meet you in person down in Little Rock.
Well, let's have lunch sometime. I appreciate being on the podcast. I think what you're doing is great. And yeah, thanks a lot.